Water. It's often seen as a difficult subject. Why is that? Is there a secret to drawing water, a special technique? Whether it's water in a waterfall, a fountain, a river, the ocean, whether it's in a spray, a wave, or a reflection, how do we draw it? How do we draw it when we're drawing with line in ink? I want to start by highlighting a few principles and techniques I focus on before I start drawing water. And then there's a 6-minute demo where I draw this fountain in the forecourt of the Musée du Louvre. I've sped up the video more when I'm drawing the architecture that frames the fountain than when I'm drawing the actual fountain and water. But it took me just under 1 hour to draw it in real time. Now, don't miss after that, because that's when I'm going to explain what I think is actually the secret, in my opinion, to drawing water. So if you get a bit impatient watching the fountain appear, just zip ahead to the end. Let's start. Now, in some ways, drawing water is nothing special, and the principles that we think of when we draw other subjects still apply. But one of the more important ones, particularly with a fountain or with moving water, is that silhouette and edges are really important. So when we have water shooting up, as in a fountain, it creates a very irregular edge, and we want to capture that irregularity. The problem is we don't capture it so much by a thick line, which will make it look more like a solid shape, and we don't want that. A better idea is to try and capture it through negative space, through the tonal value of what's behind it, which does end up being a little bit fussy. So we want to avoid blocking in a heavy outline, and we want to stay loose so that we can come in with not just irregular line work, but irregular tonal values, because we do get a different, if you like, tonal value according to how deep the water we're looking through is, and also where the light source is. I think also important when we're drawing water is to work out how we're going to spread our tonal values over the whole drawing, because this water is by far the lightest value on the page. While I drew it, I had a black and white version off camera, and you can see how part of the impact of the fountain is that its value is so much lighter than anything else around it. Even in its darkest spots, it's basically lighter than the next lightest values that we see. So drawing with line, that means there's going to be a lot of hatching and cross-hatching. Unfortunately, my 0.2mm pen was desperately running dry of ink halfway through, and so the hatching became quite problematic for me, and the pen became quite goopy at the start of lines. As always, I did my 5-minute preparatory drawing, not a thumbnail, wasn't planning anything except what sort of marks would give me the effect I wanted. And this finished up being it. And as is usually the case for me, I probably like how this looks more than in some ways I like my finished drawing. But I did draw this on a larger scale with a pen that had more ink in it, so maybe it was always going to be a better option. You can see which one you prefer. But let's start. I start by creating that tentative outline that I talked about a moment ago, because it's important that I reserve every bit of paper that I think I might want to have white or near white for the fountain. And so after that, I figure the most important thing is to map in the key architectural lines. So we have the various edges of the multiple pools upon pools that this fountain is a part of. This is just a fountain at the edge of a more significant fountain arrangement. And probably the key thing besides the water in this viewpoint, this drawing, will be the shadow provided by part of the facade of the Musée du Louvre in the background. I'm still just trying to establish what's what and basically put all the lines that I need to have accurately positioned before I start worrying about value. Because clearly once I start drawing the various shades of darkness that we need, there's no going back on those. And now I've looked carefully at the water structure to get a sense of what form the water is shooting up with, because it isn't just a solid blob of water coming up. It's coming up from multiple jets, and I want to somehow capture that effect. And the individual jets do create shadow and shade. And so I want to again capture that, but it needs to be very lightly because it is a very light tonal value for shadow on the water and shade on the water compared to every other part of the drawing, of the scene. So I've decided to do the hatching for this center pool of water, which, because it's very still, creates a dark reflection of the facade or parts of the facade behind it. And because this will be one of the darkest values on my drawing, it's also good to get it in early so that I can use it to reference how the other values are going to work. What's also particularly good is that the darkest value comes up with a very light value on the left-hand side of the fountain, because that always creates a nice sense of visual drama, as I call it, and it helps to highlight the form of the fountain. So I particularly want to be very careful and to create a nice spray effect down that left-hand side where I have that very dark value coming up against the water that's falling vertically, as opposed to the top of the fountain, which also comes up against a very dark value, but where the water is falling back on itself and so creates a slightly different effect to what we see at the side. And these are the sort of observational differences it's important to note as well. Now we have water above this still pool and below the still pool, and I need to put line work on it to both create the value, the darker tone, but also to create the uneven surface, the sense of this is water that's moving, that's rippling, that's being disturbed. There is, in fact, if we look carefully, another fountain we can just see peeking out from the right-hand side. And so that water's being disturbed by that fountain, just as this water I'm drawing now is being disturbed by the main subject fountain. So now I'm really becoming aware that my pen is running out of ink and I'm finding it very hard to get the lines. Every second line seems to have no ink, and then the start of the third line seems to have a blob of ink, so I'm getting a bit frustrated. And I'm doing lots of lines that seem to have no ink at all, and so it feels like I'm dragging a needle across the paper and just scoring the paper without any effect. However, I managed to keep coaxing it to work through a couple of different things. But I decide to more quickly move through the hatching behind. With this reflection in front, it's important to again note that there is a reflection of the fountain on the water. And so we have a stronger, lighter section in the center of the very lowest section of water. And again, that means with my line work, I have to put it on the paper so that I preserve this lighter effect in the center, in the front. There still needs to be some disturbance, some ripple, some pattern on the water with my line work, but I still have to preserve a lighter value to represent that reflection. It's also important to note that as well as there being shadows caused by the individual jets of water that are shooting up out of the base of the fountain, the overall shape of the water also attracts shadow in a certain pattern. So let's look at what my secret for drawing water is, and there'll be a couple of minutes of real-time drawing of this also at the end if you're interested in that. So a few last-minute touches, and it looks like we're done here. So what's my secret then for drawing water? My secret is I don't let myself be fooled that water is any different to any other thing that I draw. It's not special. And it's the same with smoke or fire, with clouds, or anything with a substance that moves, which is less physical than the normal objects, the normal solid objects that we would draw. Because my drawing is a capture of a moment in time. And at that moment, that water, that fire, that cloud, that smoke, it looks like something. It takes on a particular form. And quite possibly we can see through it. Quite possibly it has complex tonal values associated with it or around it. But the same, if you like, rules or techniques apply to drawing this as anything. We get confused or possibly more likely distracted by the fact that we know this is moving, and so somehow we want to put lines in to represent movement or lines to represent outlines that aren't really there, where we're perceiving through tonal variations rather than edges. But it's much like drawing a tree, where we're not trying to capture all the edges of the leaves, we're trying to capture the overall effect of the tree, and particularly the overall effect as designed by the way it captures, reflects, and hides light. It's exactly the same with water, and particularly when I'm drawing from a reference, I need to not think about the fact that it's water and simply see it as another shape that I want to capture with my line work, both through edge and outline, and also through hatching and establishing tonal values. Next time you see a scene that you'd like to draw but feel a bit intimidated because there's water in it, say to yourself, you are not special water, you are just the same as everything else I draw. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, whatever you draw, have fun. Here comes a train, but here comes a couple of minutes of real-time drawing. I'll see you next time. Bye.